Make sure we get started here in just a minute while we get all our panelists up on stage here. Our time is limited. Want to make sure that we get to as much as we can. So this will just be kind of a roundtable discussion. We're not going to do slides or anything. We're just going to be talking about the digital sprawl that higher institutions are kind of grappling with, and get a lot of different perspectives, folks that are in the thick of it, that have implemented Pathify and had it out in the world for a few years now, folks that are in the midst of implementing, recently sort of kind of begun that journey. So we're getting just a lot of perspectives, and folks that obviously are able to kind of zoom up a little bit as well and get a different perspective from there. So very grateful for everybody hanging out for this session and all our panelists here. So we will go ahead and get things kicked off, because we have an amazing panel. We'll let everybody introduce themselves really quickly, just name, title, institution, where you are, and then we will go from there for all the questions that we have. So why don't Jeff, why don't you kick it off?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Ledoux. I'm now the product manager at Pathify. Prior to that, I was at Johnson & Wales University for 10 years, and we implemented Pathify when I was there, and they've been using it for about 2 years. Chris?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm Chris Brezil. I am the Associate Vice President of Information Technology at the New School. We are located in New York City. I've been at the university for about 23 years now. And we are actually, as Dustin was mentioning, just in the beginning of our journey in the implementation of Pathify. Jared?
Hey, I'm Jared Stein, and after over a dozen years in higher ed and a decade with Instructure, makers of Canvas, I now run a company called Rarebird, which helps ed techs and the higher ed institutions they serve make a positive impact faster. Rene.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rene Eborn, and I'm the Deputy of Digital Transformation and Associate Vice President at Utah State University. It's located in northern Utah. It's a couple 100 miles away from Yellowstone National Park, and it's beautiful this time of year. It's nice to be with you all.
Awesome. And yeah, just so folks know who I am, community engagement lead at Pathify. I've worked in ed tech for several years. I've been at Pathify for just about a year, a couple of weeks away from a 1-year anniversary. But I love doing stuff like this. I host our podcast, Connect to Campus. Go check it out. And manage our social media. So if you see our posts out there, that's usually me. But yeah, really excited for this conversation. And I am based in Delaware. If there's somebody else from there, I would love to know it. So please put it in the chat. So our conversation today, again, it is exploring the journey of institutions, how they were able to harness the complexity of their myriad of digital tools before and after Pathify. That's kind of going to be our guiding sort of pathway here, pun intended. But we will start, usually where a lot of institutions begin before Pathify, before, they've made the decision to utilize the tool, is, there's this sort of treasure map of this maze that students have to navigate. And we work really closely to try to alleviate that sort of hindering aspect of the student experience. And the ed tech boom in the past couple of years has really only exacerbated that issue. So we'll start with you, Chris, on this one. What did your institution's student engagement look like before you kind of were like, we need something else? You were looking, and obviously now kind of started on the journey of trying to address that issue. What was sort of the before state?
Yeah, great question, Dustin. It's a really complicated environment, and it's a really complicated environment, particularly for students to navigate. We are a banner school for our student information system. So obviously, a lot of what students have to do, registration, et cetera, goes through Banner. We are, like I said, currently implementing Pathify, but we still use Ellucian's portal. We have another third-party mobile application. So yet another thing that people need to, be working on. Housing applications, advising, events. And none of these have the same interface. There's single sign-on, so that's great. But it's a real challenge for students and faculty as well. because there really just are so many different applications out there, and so, you know, for the myriad of things that people need to do just on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and so Rene, if you want to kind of pick this up too, just from that institutional perspective, obviously you have seen kind of the byproduct of making the change, but if you can kind of remember back to the before state, if you can speak to that really quick.
Oh, I can definitely remember the before state. So, and as Chris mentioned, higher education, it is complex. We have a lot of systems, and a lot of them are older systems because, you know, higher ed, we don't have a lot of money to invest in. So, you know, some of us have had our student information systems for, you know, 2 decades, and there's been a lot of customization and a lot of technical debt that's been acquired by these institutions. And so at Utah State University, we're no different. We had a lot of different applications, but we actually did have kind of our own little portal. We called it My USU. It was kind of My USU.1, and it was basically a link farm. What we did is we had this kind of interactive web page where we just put all these links, and so all the students would just go on and they'd link. I like to refer to it as our NASCAR, because we'd have ads everywhere, and it wasn't very targeted. It was kind of a hard thing to upkeep. It was our IT staff had to work really hard to keep it maintained, and so for us, we were very excited to go in with something that would simplify and help us scale at the same time. And so I do remember that. And we're still working on that simplification. We haven't conquered everything yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll kind of be sitting with this. I think a lot of just the technical debt, maybe the digital sprawl, these sort of verbs and feelings, and yeah, it's just very visceral for everybody involved. Like you said, you know, like students are just getting confused and turn around. You know, it's all that kind of maintenance of things that IT folks or anybody on campus, faculty and staff and everything are dealing with. So we'll kind of keep building on this. I'll ask a different question. I'll go to you, Jeff, if you have sort of perspectives on, again, just sort of the before state from like JWU, or just sort of like holistically, as you've sort of had more conversations across sort of different campuses and everything, like the top problems when it comes to modernizing tech stacks. So if it's like, you know, again, the problem is identified, but then it's like there are just going to be those sort of complicating factors of like how you sort of navigate moving on from old tools or different things like that. So just any perspectives that you have, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo my colleagues here, because if I was on the other side of the fence, I would definitely agree, and I still do. It's really hard. So one of the biggest thing for JWU when I was there was, and the reason why I went to Pathfi is because we could kind of align most of our systems, and hopefully someday all of them, in this like single pane of glass view, right? So I don't need to tell a student or a faculty member or a staff member to go to like 10 different systems to do their job, or to like operate as a day-to-day student at JWU. And so like one of my missions at JWU, and certainly here at Pathfi, is like, we shouldn't be getting in the way of a student, right? And doing their thing, right? Like technology should never do that. And when it does, there's a problem, you should probably take a look at it. So that's a pretty big, I think, signpost for us, is just like, make sure we give you the information you need. And then on the same side, when we're looking at Pathfi, we wanted to be able to do that. You know, can you integrate with the following things? And the answer was usually yes, or like, hey, let's partner and see what we can do about it, which was pretty great. So yeah, it's just, there are systems literally everywhere.
Yeah, well, and I think there's twofold things that are coming up to my mind, is that I think we're like, you know, addressing like the known problems, known issues, like people sort of acknowledge this, but certainly there is going to be people who are like, hey, I like these tools, these work for me and all that. So like you kind of have to try to like honor what is and try to build upon that to what can be. And I remember this sort of came up, Jared, when we did our podcast episode on Connected Campus, so definitely go check that out. But like, to get your perspective, like just sort of holistically, that idea of like, you know, you're going to have that mix of new and legacy, and how do you try to like, you know, manage the transition and all of that. So yeah, just I'm always curious and excited to hear your perspective on something like this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think when you look across campus and you see the variety, the diversity of technologies, and a lot of custom integrations between them, you know, that's certainly its own challenge. But once there is will, institutional will, or will amongst leaders to make a positive change, you still have to recognize that the technology you have has functionality and it has familiarity for users. And so part of the change management happens even before you select a new solution. And that has to do with the idea that as you're getting input from all the people who use the old technology, and they're going to have their complaints, they're also going to have their desires. That really results in some compounding feature requirements for any new technology that can be hard for anybody to sort of pass the bar on. So you as administrators and leaders always have to consider, when is the benefit of changing worth some of the things you might leave behind? When is more, in terms of capabilities and requirements and what people expect, less than what you might actually gain from the change? And when sometimes is less itself going to be more?
Yeah, I mean, the change management piece, that's going to be a whole other question that we'll get to later. So we'll get back to that. But something else, I think, is just sort of the before state and how you decide to sort of, kind of navigate getting to what can be and what you're sort of desiring, your goals and everything. The sort of the build versus buy is kind of, the classic dilemma and sort of the fork in the road and everything. So Chris, I think you were sort of grappling with this issue at New School. So if you briefly want to just sort of talk about how that sort of like went in terms of like you were at that fork and you had to kind of do the exploration to figure out what was the best way to go.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, that definitely was something that we were, really strongly considering, and actually sort of even headed down the road on the build side. We thought it would give us a lot of flexibility in terms of design and in terms of just product ownership, if you will. So that there was a real incentive, for us to be considering that. Ultimately, we actually even started engaging with a third party that was going to help us on the build side, because we're a mid-sized school. We don't have a huge development team. But we really did come to that fork in the road and decided that the buy side was the better option for us. There were cost benefits to doing it that way. Building is very expensive. Looking at a product like Pathify, for instance, we just felt that there would be enough benefits that we could build within it, if you will, but still benefit from having a canvas that's been already started. So
yeah, I mean, and that's kind of like the interesting idea is that sometimes it's like, oh, we're building it, but we are still going to need help to do that. Like, so it's almost just like an acknowledgement of like, okay, well, if we're already going to sort of be open to doing that, like maybe again, just sort of on a number of factors, if it's time or quality, cost, the classic sort of kind of triangle there, like, again, and it's just making sure that you are, I think, making that examination and understanding like, okay, yeah, we'll build it, knowing that it's going to take a long time versus like sometimes I think folks will like start down that path and you maybe not really fully understood the kind of commitment that you're making and all that. And I think we've talked with folks sort of at different points in that journey. So it's always kind of interesting for me to kind of hear that as people have sort of examined it and been like, I don't think that's going to work. Or it's like, yeah, we went a year in and we're just like, oh my gosh, this is way more, bit off more than we can choose. So, Rene, I think you made a note on this as well. I think just because you had to acknowledge that you had just kind of a link farm or just something kind of very legacy and simplistic that you realized just didn't cut it.
Yeah, I mean, I think across the nation in higher education, I think a lot of the IT divisions are realizing that they can't be a DevOps shop and compete like substantially. I mean, some can, but I think Utah State, we're no different. We realized early on that there are some things we can do and some things we can't. And so it's been for the last few years, we've realized that we are more of an integration focus at Utah State University. So for us, coming out of this, trying to decide the build versus buy, we had already built and we realized we weren't scalable and we realized we wanted to really simplify our ecosystem. And so for us, it wasn't a build versus buy. We knew from the get-go that we wanted to go out and find a solution that met our needs and our requirements, that was kind of a turnkey where we could make it, it would happen quick for us. And so that was kind of our story.
Yeah. And even just where my mind goes with this too is like, the quality piece where it could, the perspective could be like, oh, well, let's spare no expense. Let's do all the, and all that. But it's like, yeah, when is more actually less, when is less more, like you're saying, Jared, or like the idea that it's not like a race to the bottom. It's kind of just acknowledgement of like, if we can do this quicker and do it better, all that time and money, like I just wrote about this on our blog, is that like that's more you can put back towards students. Like if we're investing so heavily in this, but we're not getting the outcome and all that, and it's just like you kind of have to, make these choices where, there may be the idea that like, if we did it ourselves, it's going to be perfect and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, maybe like that could be a possibility. But I think digital tools like ed tech providers in this space, and I've been talking with a lot of people recently where like flexibility just keeps coming up. Like that is the action word, that is the goal that you should be aiming towards. And that can mean a lot of things in terms of how you're building a tool and everything. So if you can speak to this, Jared, before we kind of turn the page over to sort of like after Pathify and the outcomes and everything, but like, what is your point of view, Jared, on why it is crucial for institutions to choose tools that are flexible and powerful enough to adapt to different use cases?
Yeah, I think sometimes that term flexibility gets confused with all powerful or comprehensive. I think ideally when we're considering any technology, especially systems that are used by so many of the campus community and cover so much of the student experience, we want it to be a single, easy to use application that does everything for everyone, and it should come at a really low price. And maybe if you throw world peace in there, it's going to sweeten the deal. But I think, everyone tends to realize as you get into these kinds of considerations about new technology, that the more stakeholders that you're engaging, that you need to involve, and the more use case specific features you're going to have greater complexity in the product, which means it's probably going to be less likely to be adopted the way you want and less likely to be used. And from a provider perspective, harder to improve over time. So I think flexibility is important. It goes hand in hand with simplicity, and I think that is something where you can look at it almost as the opposite of the demands for it to be both easy and comprehensive. That is to say, technology that's simple and flexible allows for a bunch of different use cases, even if it's not specifically spelled out for each one of those use cases, right? So that with a little bit of imagination and creativity on the part of users and administrators, you can see how a tool can be used for a bunch of different diverse use cases without requiring a bunch of specific features for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's really kind of something I've been sitting with a while, and just like that it connects with so many other things in life, when it's like, it's beautiful when something is like easy to use, like right away, but then like it rewards the more that you sort of like invest time into it and personalize and integrate more things and all of that. So trying to always kind of thread that needle, and, we're always trying to like, update and enhance our platform and new integrate, like all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like, you open that box and you can get started and have a great tool, but then it just gets better over time. The more that you sort of like, you get more, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. That's where I wanted to end up with that one. So moving on here, after Pathify, we sort of have kind of a cluster of questions that we want to examine here. So again, harnessing, we talk a lot about this at Pathify, harnessing the complexity, the digital sprawl, all the tools and everything. I'll try to hit on as many people for this one, because I feel like this is kind of the big question here. How has that sentiment manifested at your institution? Chris, if you want to start us off on this one.
Yeah, sure. So, I can't tell you, like a few years back, how many meetings I went into and everybody just talked about app fatigue. It was like, that was like the buzzword for probably a couple of years at our institution. So, really, to what everybody here is saying, trying to think about how we can simplify, but give that, degree of flexibility, is really important to us as we start with our implementation. Also thinking about things like support issues, for instance, and our team within, IT and our help desk. The more complex these tools are, the more of them that they are, the harder they are to support. So it's not just thinking about the simplification from the end user point of view. But when they do call in, how do you help them? Security issues across all these tools, of course. The more you have of them, the more potential holes there are. So those are all things that I think we're really looking for, to try to simplify, but at the end of the day, I think going back to something that Jeff was really talking about is focusing on that student experience, that customer experience, and how can we maximize that for them. So those are a lot of the things that we're really focused on as part of the implementation.
Yeah, and I'll want to go to both you, Jeff and Rene, but Rene, I know you had some things you wanted to say on this.
Yeah, I just on that same topic, harnessing the complexity. We have a lot of complexity, and how that's kind of manifested and become a little bit better and more positive for us at Utah State University is that we had a lot of different channels and ways that we communicated with students. We would send them emails, but we know that 50% of people don't open their emails and read them. We would send them text messages, but sometimes they would and we didn't actually have an app to do that with at Utah State. So for us, it was kind of the opposite way, where we wanted to take the complexity out of our student communication and do more targeted communication for our users and have a really positive user experience. It was very simple. And so it's manifested it very positively for us at Utah State, and that we have we have about 70 different roles, and we're always trying to create new ones to have very targeted content for users so that it's very personalized, because we know that personalization is really important to our students. We have different groups created for all of our satellite campuses and our clubs. And almost every student-facing department now is represented and has a way to communicate in a very targeted, personalized way, because we really want our My USU 2.0 Pathify to be our Aggie gateway to USU. So we want each user to have kind of this unique experience, and it's hard to do, but we found that with Pathify we have the power to do that. And we have the ability to kind of guide each user through their own life and their own student life cycle at Utah State, and be able to adapt and target these groups. So that's been able to help us achieve our overall goals and objectives with what we were trying to do. And so I think it's manifested in a positive way for us, which we're very happy about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just the premise of my question of harnessing the complexity from what you're explaining, state institution, a lot of constituents, students and populations, and you can start to harness that by personalizing what they're seeing, trying to get as much noise and sort of clutter out of their way, where it's okay, you're at the satellite campus, what you need is going to be completely different, because there's just going to be, a different community there, and all that. So yeah, Jeff, any perspectives on sort of the harnessing the complexity, how that sentiment was coming up as you were sort of implementing, getting things done, and how you're trying to kind of, I guess, manage the experience over time from when you were at JWU?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things for us was the communication portion of it, and Rene kind of touched upon this, but to the point of no one reads their emails anymore, right? But we knew they were going to be going to the portal, right? So announcements became a big thing. One of the sweet examples we were coming out, we kind of stumbled upon, which was a pretty cool win for us, and I think speaks to Jared's point about just kind of figuring out your solution, and then what could you actually do with it. Just kind of, we like to break out of the mold a little bit. So IT would often send out an email of hey, this is going to be downtime or whatever, and no one would read it, right? And then we would get a complaint or two from hey, you didn't tell me there was downtime. So well, there was. So we ended up creating a group, added literally everybody to it, and then whenever there was a downtime announcement or whatever, it went to the group and people got notified, which is pretty sweet. It ends up in their activity feed. If it was serious enough, we could also put an announcement out or notice or whatever. So there's this snowballing effect of just increasing communication, but also putting it in one place where people now the comment became, well, have you been to the portal in the past day? Because there's announcements there, and things like that, and your activity feed is bustling. And so I think those are the unexpected wins that actually we thought would be pretty sweet, but when they became an actual concrete thing that we had evidence for, it was actually really nice. So
yeah, and the communication piece is, so it's come up multiple answers here, but that complexity where it's we have different things that we need to tell different people in different ways, where again, if you're just relying on email, it's like, I mean, the subject says urgent or important, whatever, like that's as much as you could do versus like, should we post it in a group that has, pretty much all of our students in it, or, put this out to a particular role? Is it an announcement? Is it like, you can really kind of harness the complexity in the sense of like the feature set of a tool that you're using versus relying on sort of a simplistic sort of communication modality and everything. So really great stuff. So change management, we are here. We're going to talk about it. It's obviously just an aspect of, I've talked with a lot of CIOs and higher ed IT leaders. This comes up a lot, is sort of that human aspect of like how you're kind of bringing people together and getting the work done, building sort of excitement for a tool like this to be able to achieve and harness the complexity and achieve what you're aiming for and everything. So I know you have a good story here, Rene. I'll make sure to kind of get your input on this as well, Chris, as you're beginning the journey, as you're anticipating the change management process. But Rene, as you're looking back, what are sort of the highlights of the journey that you went on?
So the highlights for me is that we got it done very fast. It was a very quick project for us, which sometimes technology projects don't. They usually go beyond their scope and their timeline. And so for us, we were very excited that we had a really great project manager, and we had a great team, a really wonderful implementation team to help us. And so we had a team about 10 to 12 people, and we divided those teams into kind of groups. We had, with each group, we had a technical team and we had a functional team. And then we pulled in other colleagues and stakeholders in as we needed their specific certain areas. And we took a 3-phase approach to it. We had our initiation and planning phase, which is where we went through and planned and knew what we were going to do with our phase 1, which features and tools we were going to go live with. And that took about 2 months to get that going. And then we implemented and went live. So we purchased this in like May and June. We planned and we literally went live in August that same year, which was phenomenal. And a lot of people are like, user adoption is the biggest thing, right? You can build anything, but if people don't use it, we've just had a phenomenal user adoption approach. And I think it's just because as I mentioned earlier, we didn't really have an app, one place for everything that was very user friendly. And this made it very simple. And we've had a lot of growth. And once we still have a lot to still work on. We have our own internal roadmap, but once we had this going, it seemed to take off really quickly, and the change was very smooth. I think part of our story too is kind of unique, is that our students were involved in this. Our USU Student Association president had come to us and said, we want a tool, and they were involved, and they're actually on our advisory governance committee now. We have student representatives. So this really is a tool for the students that's kind of governed by the students in a way, in a certain way. So it's been very successful. And I think the change management was following good project management rigor was really helpful for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And major takeaway action item for folks, just any digital tool, get user input, talk to your students, like get them involved. Because I think that it made me think of just the idea of the change management process, and where frustration could certainly come out is like you do a bunch of work in sort of the wrong direction, and it's just sort of like, oh, what's the point or stuff. But if you're doing it sort of in concert, in tandem, and even just like the genesis of it, the beginning of the journey was certainly heavily informed by student feedback, and then keeping those lines of communication open is definitely going to be a big part of the equation. But Chris, is there anything that you're sort of anticipating doing to try to get your arms around sort of the change management process, which I think by its nature, there's going to be some sort of inherent chaos and things that are unpredictable or whatever else, but obviously planning can go a long way. So just curious sort of your perspective on kind of anticipating this change management.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we're looking at this, I think, in a few different ways. So, even as we were in the final selection process for Pathify, we got a group of key stakeholders together, to say, hey, this is the direction we're really looking in. These are all the features that this product has, and to get that initial buy-in from them. So I think that was really important, and we're continuing to do that with those folks as well. So, a lot of the people who we're looking for, who are going to create content, for instance, in the portal and the mobile app, to get them, really heavily invested in the product. That is one of the issues I think we have right now with our current solution. besides from it just being a link farm, we have a lot of old content in our portal that, folks just aren't really looking at. So we're really looking to get those folks, involved from the beginning. The other thing that we're really looking also to do, and our roadmap is certainly a little bit longer than Rene's, is we're looking to actually do a pilot also with once we have a good portion of Pathify up and running, so we can get that feedback and get some students in there, faculty, have them look around, let them give us some of their ideas about what's working and what's not. So those are some of the elements that we're really focusing on as far as change management goes.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, because again, it's complicated. It can be chaotic and all that, but again, it's just good planning and everything. And yeah, getting all the stakeholders together, building that kind of coalition is certainly half the battle. But we have just a few more minutes for our questions before we open it up to audience Q&A. And I do see that there's one question there. I'll make sure that we can give our panel here kind of a full opportunity, but keep the chat going. Think of your questions, put them there, or we'll certainly be able to get to as much as we can here as we wrap up our panel questions. So, Jared, I'll start with you on this one of like, the user experience, user design for higher ed institutions. Obviously, you're wanting to create this really relevant and engaging digital student experience with a tool like this, and bringing together all the various tools that an institution uses. So, just how important is that sort of like value, of like a good, relevant, engaging user design for students? Like, how important do you feel like that is to institutions?
Yeah, I think it's super important. So research on web design going way back shows that on the one hand, people say they want a simple experience, but on the other hand, they'll tolerate what other people might think to be a bunch of information if that information is relevant to them. So I think it all starts with putting ourselves in the shoes of the students and understanding what they need day to day, week to week, month to month, right? And hiding or making invisible all of the things that they may not want or may not need on a given day just because we might think it's important. So, eliminating that friction, giving them what they need day to day, those things are all important to user experience. And what I like about Pathify is that it does maintain that simplicity for students. It does help them to get to the things that they need to do and they need to accomplish day to day. It's not just the info dump that the institution thinks that they need to represent for students. But at the same time, you have to have that balance with putting in front of students the kinds of activities, co-curriculars, services, whatever, that they may not know that they want or know that they need day to day, that help them succeed and thrive in higher education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think of like the paradigm shift that has to happen, because a lot of places maybe have a legacy portal, or the link farms that have come up a lot in our conversation, just sort of like the notion of like, hey, it's all there, like just go find it, or use it or whatever. And the idea of like making it available more in a way that's easier to find, or more streamlined, or able to be personalized, like the idea that you can anticipate that as an administrator and be like, okay, you're a first year business student who lives on campus, you're going to need to know about these things. There's some other stuff that maybe you don't, but then like that's presented to the student, they can be like, well, actually, yeah, I do really want that. Like they can start to like, by what's provided and served up to them, adapt it even further from there, to make that interface even more useful for them. But I do want to try to get to some of our questions here. So the one that came in before from Lauren about biggest win for your institution post Pathify implementation and most used feature by students. I know Rene, we're jumping in there with an answer. Jeff, is there anything that you can think of from your JWU days of just like a good win, most used features?
Most used feature I can't speak to. I'm assuming it probably some tools for like email or whatever. Like I'll echo what Rene said. I'll tell you the biggest win though, which was wild, was groups. just kind of watching, like, especially like we had some accepted students groups, and just kind of watching the organic conversation that just happened without like staff member prompting, right? It was just kind of like, hey, I was accepted in the baking and pastry program. Here's where I'm thinking about like living on campus, like all like that just kind of happened. And like that just made me, that was kind of like one of the like check marks for like portal success for us, was just like, that's super sweet. Just kind of like logging into the portal and seeing students talking to each other without a staff member being like asking the default question, right? Like, hey, tell us about your program. They didn't ask. It was just a thing that happened, you know, or they would be like, here's my Instagram handle and I love shoes or whatever. And it's just like, that's super sweet. So yeah, groups was a really unexpected huge win for me, at least. I was just super happy about that. And then just being able to just like wrap everything into the portal and put a bunch of like department websites into the portal so people could search them really nicely and easily became a pretty big user experience thing for that. Kind of tickled me a little bit as we went along in implementation. Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, search as just like a functional piece, but then I do appreciate these sort of like warm and fuzzy sort of like big win of just like organic student engagement with one another. And that, you know, you've kind of, because that's what I think, you know, it should be, is that you're creating sort of the space and the opportunity to make it easy. And it's like, hopefully you can kind of just like let it happen. You know, you kind of catalyze the students talking with one another, but you are able to just sort of like let it happen and everything. So yeah, definitely awesome anecdote there. But this is a good one because it may just be kind of quick answers. How many non-IT people were involved in keeping Pathify living and breathing? So Rene, I'm curious for you, because I mean you kind of have a bit more of a longer sort of perspective on like, you know, other people being in the mix of sort of maybe curating, managing content or different things like that. So
yeah, so at Utah State, we currently we have non-IT people. We have one full-time person that's kind of our coordinator that manages kind of the actual portal as a kind of a bridge between IT and the functional users. But because we have launched Pathify Enterprise for our institution, we actually have a lot of non-IT people that are involved, because if there are people that want to start a group, we train them how to run their group, and then they run their group. Or we may have satellite campuses who want to have their own person that runs all of their stuff. And so a lot of people by volunteer get involved because they want to use the tool to its fullest capacity. So I'm sure we have at least, I mean, on our advisory group, we have over 20 people that are just sit on the advisory group. So a lot of it, if you're going to run an enterprise and you don't want it to be a huge issue from an IT resource perspective, or to be able to support it, you need to be able to do kind of a train the trainer model and get everyone trained so that they can run their portion of the piece of the portal. So
yeah,
so we have quite a few actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think I'm curious, I guess, just you know, in terms of like asking a question like that, it can be like, more is not necessarily bad, like more is more, you know, and just how we were kind of framing stuff before, where it's just like you know, doing that kind of train the trainer perspective. Like I would imagine there's definitely like a really successful use case for that sort of thing, where like people are empowered to have some level of autonomy with how they're managing different pieces of like Pathway platform and everything. Because that's like I think a pain point that we hear and see with folks that we talk to, is that like whatever was before ends up getting bottlenecked, and there's, you know, again, all the myriad of tools that are always trying to like, you know, address tickets on and everything else. So just the idea of like, hey, can you update our page with this, that, I think it's just like,
they could go
not
do
a priority
exactly
item.
Yeah, and they can go do it. And then we also have guidelines, and we have branding standards, and we have like governance around it, right? There's, you know, you can't just go do, you know, crazy things. But I found, and I think that with our you know, we have, like I said, we have one coordinator that works full time, and then there's a couple of us that work, you know, like part-time, you know, to help support things in some ways. But we really do try to make it where it's enterprise. We try to give everybody access to their areas to be able to market and communicate the way they want to, right? The different groups, or even the different departments, you know, we have departments that want to use it to send out. So it's really streamlined that way. And I'll put a link in. We actually have a really good like information webpage where people can go look and see how we organize it and help people get started in that. But I would hope that you would want to have lots of non-IT people involved because that makes it more successful.
Mhm. Yeah, Chris, I'm curious maybe how you're like anticipating this, or because I think certainly implementation to a point is a very technical process, but there can certainly be a lot of folks in that sort of advisory capacity or things like that as you're in that phase. But curious if you have thoughts on this.
Yeah. So, for all the reasons that have been talked about, I mean, we are looking so forward to having more non-IT people involved. It really is exactly the same sort of process. People submit help desk tickets, update my content. I need this. Can it be done by then? We want to be out of that business and give people, the autonomy and encourage them to go and manage their own content, to give them the ability to do that. So we are incredibly excited to have a tool that has some of those workflow features and giving people access and also the granularity to be able to do that. So that is something that we are really, really looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. We do just have a few more minutes left. If there's final quick questions we can get to, please do put them in the chat, but certainly you can keep connected to folks on the panel here. But I know maybe we'll kind of end with Jared, Jeff, you both kind of have kind of wider lens on sort of working with a lot of institutions, a lot of different people and everything. I'll give both of you kind of opportunity for sort of final thought, final sort of calls to action for people to talk about, or sort of like takeaways that you're having from this conversation here. Because I feel like, there's so much that we could continue to talk about, obviously, but curious your perspectives on just sort of like some of the stuff around maybe even just, having non-IT people in the mix, or, how you sort of are managing and creating a sort of powerful platform for students to use.
Yeah, I think speaking to that point about having non-IT people in the mix, one of the themes that has kind of continued throughout this conversation is the importance of the student experience and delivering that student experience to students where they are, depending on their needs and what's relevant to them. So any kind of project such as this should always begin with that student experience from the student's perspective. Getting students involved, whether you're an institution or a technology provider, that's critical. And I think going forward, it's just going to be more and more important as students act more and more like consumers.
Yeah. Final thoughts, Jeff, to bring us home.
I'm gonna echo what Jared said, because he has my gears going right now about user experience, but he did say something about like what we think is important might not be what the end user thinks is important. And JW was a Luminous school beforehand, and we kind of students didn't have a choice of what they saw on the screen, right? It was just kind of like, you're a student role, here's all of the portlets that you can see. Pathify is super sweet because they can choose what they want to see. But I think it is worth having the conversation with folks that are outside of IT on, yes, you think this is important, but here's some data to show maybe that we need to change some things around. Or if you really want to raise this to the top, we probably need to adjust this page or adjust this widget, and you can do that with Pathify, which is pretty great. But data and analytics is pretty important to back up those arguments. So it's no longer like, I feel this way, like we can actually show, right? Like, well, you feel that way, but students don't, right? Students just want to get to their email or Canvas or, wherever they want to go. So like, let's raise those to the top instead. And when people are willing to have conversations like that, that's when you start to really kind of like supercharge your portal experience. And I think we started to get there at JW when I was there, and I hope they're still doing that. I think that they are, because I check in every now and again, but I think that we're doing the same thing here on Pathify as far as integrations are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I agree,
Yeah.
Jeff. At Utah State, we started out, and then we created an advisory group, like I was telling you, and we have an advisory board that help us. And once Pathify started getting really, our MyUSU started getting very popular, we had everybody coming to us wanting to put everything in the portal, and we had to do that exact same thing. Our director, went and got the data and said, you know what, the data doesn't back this up, and it was kind of an uncomfortable conversation to have, like, with our provost office saying, you know what, actually, That's not what they want. They want the link to Canvas here, or they want this here. And so I suggest that anybody that is getting ready to do this or in the middle of doing this is to really create an advisory group and include the students and use your data to make those decisions, because that's the best way to keep it so that it's useful and it's meaningful to the students.
Yeah, just loving a very holistic conversation of just, from day one until day infinity, keeping it useful, keeping it relevant. And just that, for me, I think what I'm going to be taking away is just like sort of the optimism and the creativity, like the imagination, because of the flexibility and all these sort of things, like that energy, I think goes such a long way of like, envisioning what can be and kind of striving towards that and doing it together, doing it with all the folks who are going to be important stakeholders, students, definitely a huge one, but then, yeah, faculty, staff, IT folks, everybody, bringing them together, having these advisory groups, keeping those conversations going, and, making changes based on, the data and the feedback that you're getting. And, yeah, just kind of setting yourself up and all your students for success and everything. So Rene I know you mentioned that helpful website that kind of goes into a little bit more detail about your My USU platform. So we will end it there. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel for sharing all of your awesome insights. And please do, everybody attending, keep the conversation going, connect with these folks, but please do enjoy the rest of our summit here. And thanks for hanging out with us.